Hi, my name is Melanie, and I decided to do my project on different communication strategies for interacting with library patrons suffering from mental illness. These strategies are helpful not only to librarians, but also to anyone who interacts with people suffering from mental illness. I chose this topic because, as a librarian, I have noticed that disturbances involving mentally ill patrons always seem to escalate into the patron getting kicked out or the police being called, and I wanted to find a way to prevent that. The Mountain View Public Library's mission statement states, "Our library is for everyone. We are a free resource helping our community connect, create, and learn. Patrons with mental illness are part of the community and deserve the same level of service as someone not suffering from a mental illness." In my experience, library staff deals with mentally ill patrons in a less than ideal manner. We joke, we give them nicknames, we shoo them out the door, we call the police, but mostly we just ignore them and hope they'll go away. I'm including myself in this assessment because I'm guilty of this behavior and the same mental attitude. I hope with the communication strategies I've researched that I can help change the way the library staff at my library and myself thinks and interacts with the mentally ill patrons. To me, one of the biggest factors of this mentality is the media. They fuel the stereotypes about people suffering from mental illness by portraying them as dangerous in movies and on TV, and newspapers sensationalize crimes that have been committed by mentally ill people. I believe that our fear could stem from an inability to communicate with them as well as the lack of knowledge about mental illness. I just want to give a little background statistics on mental illness. Most people suffering from a mental illness also suffer from substance abuse. 20 to 25% of homeless individuals struggle with mental illness as opposed to 6% of the general population. And chronic homeless individuals, who are people that are homeless for a year or longer, are much more likely to suffer from a mental illness. Some of the most common psychological disorders are anxiety disorders, mood disorders, dementia, eating disorders, and schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. Schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders are typically what come to mind when mental illness is mentioned. Psychotic disorders are mental disorders in which a person's personality is severely confused and that person loses touch with reality. When a psychotic episode occurs, a person becomes unsure about what is real and what isn't real, and usually experiences delusions, hallucinations, off the wall behavior, chaotic speech, and incoherency. The most important thing to remember is that your behavior determines 80% of patron behavior. In most cases, handling a bad situation differently could have prevented the situation from happening altogether. There are three main areas of communication to keep in mind when interacting with patrons. The first is headspace. What I mean by that is the attitude that you go into every patron interaction with. You want to make sure you approach patrons with a calm attitude. If you go in stressed and looking for a confrontation, then that is what's going to happen. You always want to remember to lead and not follow. You want to lead patrons into the behavior that you want, which is calm, quiet, and respectful, and not follow them into loud, frantic, and rude behavior. Modeling appropriate behavior is a much more effective way of controlling behavior than yelling and threatening. Having a clear goal is one way to try and prevent a confrontation from happening. The goal should always be what is good for the patron and the other library users and not what is good for you. For example, a goal should be getting a patron to stop yelling, not getting a patron to respect you. Another example is getting a patron to stop harassing other patrons, not getting a patron to feel sorry for their actions. And the third example, getting a patron to leave, not showing a patron a thing or two. The way to do this is always show respect. Smile, make eye contact, introduce yourself, shake hands if appropriate, and don't interrupt. You also want to learn from every incident. The second area is body language. Nonverbal cues play a bigger part in interactions than you may think. It's important to be on the same level as the person you're interacting with. A good habit to get into is standing at a 15-degree angle to the person. Standing face to face can be seen as too aggressive a posture. You also want to be aware of your hands. Avoid standing with your arms crossed, as it can be perceived as I'm judging you. Hands on hips can read as I don't approve of you. Pointing at the patron can be taken as I don't like you. And hands balled into fists can read as I'm going to punch you. Better hand gestures to get in the habit of are hands in your pockets, hands behind your back, or hands at your sides. Eye contact is also important to keep in mind. You'll want to avoid not making eye contact at all and accidentally glaring at patrons. Instead, try holding eye contact for 7 to 10 seconds, then looking off to the side or down at your feet before making eye contact for another 7 to 10 seconds. Don't forget to smile. Smiling makes you much more approachable, and it can de-escalate a potential situation if you smile at anyone who approaches you. The third area is language. The type of language you use to address patrons goes a long way in determining the outcome of the interaction. Explain the reason for the rule you're trying to enforce. Also, use simple words and speak with clarity. Many people suffering from psychotic disorders or have a jumble of ideas going on in their head at one time. When you engage in lengthy conversations, it can become like background noise, and they're not able to process what you're saying. By speaking in short, simple sentences which have clarity, they're able to process your communications much more effectively. Avoid the command be quiet. Instead, ask them calmly, would you mind turning the volume down a notch or two? Along with being conscious of the type of language you're using, you want to be mindful of the tone, speed, and inflection of the language. Speak slowly. This can help stop frantic behavior and keep the patron calm. Take pauses. This will help keep you relaxed, in which turn can keep the patron relaxed. And remember to breathe. Not only does a lack of oxygen make you anxious, but it can also make the other person anxious. Breathing also helps remind the other person to breathe as well. Now I want to shift into some more concrete situations. For example, if a patron is pacing and talking to themselves, you talking to them can bring them back to reality. Ask how they are, if they need help finding anything. Again, remember that most mentally ill people are not dangerous. If someone is talking to themselves, approach very calmly and wait for a break in the conversation. Just if there was actually somebody else there, it's considered rude to interrupt, and they don't realize that there isn't actually someone else there. You can ask, is everything okay, or can I help you with a book or anything else? This lets them decide what they need. Don't point out that they are talking to themselves. They're not suddenly going to come out of a delusion because you say something. Another example is if a patron is in the middle of a delusion and putting library materials in the wrong spots. For example, putting music CDs in the cookbook section because they think spies are sending messages through the CDs. Offer to put the CDs away for them. Don't agree with whatever delusion they're having. You want to be as neutral as possible. A great line to use is, I'm not sure about that, but either way, I'll put these away for you and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. A good rule to follow is that if the delusion is not disruptful to the library, ignore it. If the delusion is disruptful, then focus on the behavior, not on the delusion. Some other helpful tips to remember are that people suffering from paranoia may need more personal space than you're accustomed to giving, and that you need to accept the fact that they may be afraid of you. Don't make the assumption that people suffering from a mental illness are not smart. Mental illness does not have anything to do with intelligence, and mentally ill people will not believe anything you tell them. If you try and lie to them, then you may destroy any trust that you may have gained. Interactions with mentally ill patrons don't have to escalate into a situation where you have to call the police. If you remember to smile, be respectful, keep calm, and remember that people suffering from mental illness are not dangerous, future interactions should go a lot smoother. Thank you.